I can't tolerate them at all. He causes me significant pain. So, I hope this off tinsel was acceptable, a step toward improvement. Joel Embiid has just shared his true feelings about Paul George, but there's more to the story. He explained why numerous NBA players are frustrated. A key factor is that Paul reportedly disclosed confidential information from a locker room discussion. I've got the complete account. Let's dissect it. The Miami gathering that altered everything. It seems many players harbor a dislike for Paul George. For Joel Embiid, the tension ignited during a team meeting in Miami. To grasp the situation fully, one must delve into the background. The Philadelphia Sixers were anticipated to be title challengers. In July 2024, when Paul George inked his 4-year, $212 million deal, it was seen as the formation of a trio with Joel Embiid that everyone labeled the Big Three. Within Tyrese Maxey, hope skyrocketed to new heights. This was more than a typical superstar signing. This represented Philadelphia's golden opportunity for their inaugural NBA title since 1983. However, by November 2024, those championship aspirations had morphed into a full-blown disaster. The Sixers found themselves with a dismal 2 wins and 11 losses, and frustrations were erupting in unforeseen ways. The events that unfolded in Miami that pivotal evening unveiled the dark side of a squad anticipated to be contenders for the title. It began with a 1.5-hour discussion that altered the course of their season. This is a team with a record of 2-11, experiencing a downward spiral. Clearly, with the presence of Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid, the situation has become critical. With a 2-11 record, this isn't what Paul George had in mind. Frustration was palpable among players, confusion reigned among coaches, and the burden of hefty contracts weighed heavily on all. However, a surprise emerged when 24-year-old Tyrese Maxey boldly addressed the issue, delivering a powerful message that resonated throughout the NBA. He called out the former MVP for his persistent lateness, asserting that it was undermining the very essence of the team. This was more than mere tardiness for practice. This encompassed everything. Team gatherings, film reviews, flights, shuttles, team gatherings. Joel Embiid. Paul consistently arrived late to every team event, causing a ripple that was toxic to the locker room atmosphere. Punctuality for team events is essential, as it creates a trickle-down effect. In times of absence, when you're delayed, when you can't make it on time to what I understood as all-encompassing, for everything was the limit. The encounter was visceral, filled with emotion, and urgently required. Here was their emerging talent, just shy of the age to rent a car without incurring added charges, challenging an athlete who had just clinched Olympic gold and was earning upwards of $50 million annually. Yet Maxey stood his ground. The gathering was meant to be inviolate, exclusively for players. A refuge where team members could express their concerns and tackle issues privately, shielded from public scrutiny. Such gatherings are commonplace in the world of athletics, governed by a tacit agreement that locker room discussions remain confidential. This fosters trust, camaraderie, and a recognition that tough talks are essential for team progress. Yet, within a day, that precious confidentiality was broken. ESPN's Shams Charania reported intricate details of the meeting, featuring nearly direct quotes from Maxey's conversation with Embiid. Within those walls, a code had been cracked, and Joel Embiid was seething with rage. He referred to the informer as a true disgrace and made it evident that he would refrain from attending any future team meetings, as all trust had been irreparably shattered. His precise remarks lingered ominously. Being in the presence of individuals who act like that is challenging. Once you cross that line, you shouldn't anticipate my participation in any future team discussions. That's simply out of the question. The sense of betrayal was profound, as it transcended basketball. It involved family. These were adult men expected to support one another, and yet someone betrayed their comrades for what? A fleeting moment in the spotlight, perhaps some material for a podcast. The core principles that underpin a successful team had been undermined, and it was apparent to all. Adding fuel to the fire, Embiid disclosed in a July 2025 ESPN feature that he was fully aware of the identity of the individual who leaked the information. He had the power to reveal their secrets to everyone, potentially ruining their standing in the league, but he opted against it. Instead, he remarked that what's done is done, underlining how the violation had severely disrupted team unity. Now, this is where it takes an intriguing turn, particularly with Paul George stepping into the narrative unexpectedly. George mirrored Embiid's frustration regarding the disclosure, expressing on his podcast, "I can't fathom how Shams obtained that info, or how it leaked at all." Both stars were said to want to unearth the source of the breach together. At first glance, George and Embiid appear to share a common ire over the betrayal. Yet, whispers started circulating that George might actually be the source of the leak. Consider this. He hosts a vibrant podcast named Podcast PE and has crafted a reputation centered on public discourse and media interaction. Certain fans and social media users explicitly blamed him, stating things like, "I don't care what anyone says, it was Paul George who spilled the tea about him." Clearly, George had just joined the squad and likely didn't feel established enough to address ongoing issues, particularly considering how tough the year had begun for him on the roster. The indirect proof was accumulating. As the newcomer, George may not have grasped or honored the importance of private locker room discussions. Additionally, he had a track record of making dubious media choices during his career. Sensational videos fueled the rumors, featuring headlines such as, "Joel Embiid confronts Paul George over the unauthorized release of the 7-6 Airs private chats," despite no concrete proof tying George to the breach. However, the fallout was inevitable. Regardless of George's actual involvement, the speculation fostered a hostile atmosphere in a climate where trust had reached unprecedented lows. The disclosure intensified lingering discontent, causing Embiid to pull back from team conversations due to his growing distrust. The camaraderie that was meant to propel them toward a championship was disintegrating right in front of them. Adding to the complexity was the rumor that Embiid would have rather rekindled ties with Jimmy Butler than brought George on board. It seemed that Embiid had his heart set on having Jimmy Butler return and was possibly not entirely thrilled with the decision to bring in George to begin with. Now, you had a player who might not have even wished for his new comrade, grappling with the aftermath of private discussions meant to foster team unity. The repercussions from this encounter would shape the remainder of Philadelphia's tumultuous season. The 76ers wrapped up with a dismal 24-58 record, their worst since 2015-16, completely excluding themselves from playoff contention. The trio experiment had turned into a total flop, and the leaked meetings significantly contributed to that downfall. However, this was merely the prologue to a more extensive narrative regarding the growing disdain NBA players had for Paul George. The gathering in Miami and what followed revealed a deeper truth about George's nature and his role as a teammate. It transcended the question of whether he was indeed the source of the leak. It highlighted a behavioral pattern that led others to suspect his potential for betrayal. The distrust sown in that Miami locker room would blossom into a larger issue, uncovering a complex network of disputes and controversies that spanned Paul George's career, helping to clarify why many of his colleagues harbored skepticism and disdain toward him. The cycle of dilemmas and fractured connections. The leak from the Miami meeting wasn't a one-off event. It marked just another installment in a prolonged narrative of Paul George stirring trouble wherever he landed. As Joel's irritation with his teammate grew increasingly evident, it became obvious that the underlying issues were far more complex than a single breach discussion. The NBA functions like a tight-knit circle, and news spreads quickly when a player repeatedly stirs the pot and undermines trust with his colleagues. What Embiid was starting to see, and what many across the league had already discerned, was that Paul George had a history of igniting tensions and retreating when challenges arose. George eventually acknowledged that sharing the court with Embiid was tough due to the team's absence of winning habits, but he attempted to portray it as a group problem rather than owning up to his part in the turmoil. The parallels between Embiid and George's journeys were indeed notable, yet not in a favorable way. Both dealt with frequent injuries. Both were scrutinized for their reliability despite hefty contracts, and both earn a reputation for being tricky teammates in their unique manners. Supporters and journalists branded them as human GPS systems for their unflagging issues and charged them with resting players or faking ailments to lose games. However, Embiid openly acknowledged his challenges and aimed to overcome them, whereas George often shifted the blame onto others. Yet, George's troubles with fellow NBA players spanned well past Philadelphia. His career is filled with severed ties and fierce animosities, cultivated by his own behavior and statements. The most notable of these disputes was with Damian Lillard, a rivalry that starkly showcased why numerous players had come to resent George. The Lillard feud kicked off in the 2019 NBA playoffs, marked by Lillard's incredible 37-foot buzzer beater over George, which knocked the Thunder out. Rather than acknowledge the incredible play, George dismissed the shot as a bad one in his post-game remarks, revealing a lack of sportsmanship that would characterize him in the eyes of many. Lillard's reply was sharp and impactful. LOL. Yet George wasn't finished. The rivalry intensified in the 2020 NBA bubble, when George and Patrick Beverley ridiculed Lillard's gesture during a pivotal moment after he failed to convert key free throws. Such immaturity was precisely what caused George to lose the respect of his peers, as he chose to kick a rival while he was down rather than exhibit the sportsmanship expected of true champions. Lillard responded with pinpoint accuracy, reminding everyone that he had previously eliminated both Beverley and George from playoff contention, delivering one of the sharpest rebukes in NBA lore. Keep bouncing, teams. Escaping the challenge. You guys are weak. The reality of those statements hit hard, for George had crafted a reputation as someone who sidestepped challenges instead of confronting them directly. The clash with Devin Booker revealed a different facet of George's troublesome character. When Booker came into the league, George saw him as a younger brother, but their bond deteriorated in the 2021 Western Conference Finals. Booker later acknowledged that their tension originated during that series and remains unresolved, with George conceding that a boundary was crossed during their exchange. Notably, George's account of the relationship's shift was striking, emphasizing how abruptly the atmosphere transformed. Tensions rose. The source was him. When recounting disputes, he undeniably contributed to. George skillfully deflected fault onto others, His reluctance to own up to his actions was emerging as a distinct trend. The issue involving Chris Paul further illuminated George's true nature. In the past, Paul lent a hand to George by suggesting an eye specialist after a botched surgery, indicating a favorable bond. However, during the 2021 playoff series, they exchanged remarks that George believed were inappropriate and unnecessary between two males. His reaction to Paul's comments was revealing. He claimed that Paul's aggression stemmed from insecurity and stated that once allegiances are formed, they remain. This enduring resentment from playoff banter showcased a level of immaturity that did not sit well with other players. George had a track record of stirring up issues, even among his own teammates. During the 2020 playoff downfall of the Clippers, he had a fiery exchange with Montrezl Harrell about defensive misunderstandings. Harrell allegedly said to George, "You think you're always right. No one can teach you anything," reflecting the arrogance that made collaboration tough. This made the frustrations of other players even worse, as George's talent was undeniable. A 9-time All-Star with exceptional shooting and defensive skills, his abilities were often eclipsed by his struggles to maintain harmony with teammates and a knack for generating drama. The cycle never changed. George would enter a new team filled with optimism. Initial progress seemed promising, yet inevitably, tensions arose, bonds would deteriorate, and George would transition to yet another opportunity. His journey spanned the Pacers, Thunder, Clippers, and Sixers, marked by a legacy of severed ties and discontented former teammates. What Joel Embiid started to realize, illuminating his escalating annoyance with George, was that these occurrences were not random or mere personality conflicts. This defined Paul George, a figure who generated issues, shunned accountability for his involvement in disputes, and chose to walk away when the going got tough. In April 2025, an anonymous survey of NBA players conducted by The Athletic exposed how pervasive the negative sentiment towards George had become. He was listed among several players as the most overrated, with peers using the poll to voice their discontent regarding his frequent team transitions and playoff failures. The findings of the survey transcended mere on-court statistics. They resonated with the theme of respect. Players pointed out George's tendencies to grumble about his role, craving more ball-handling chances while simultaneously insisting on playing off the ball. This dual-approach mindset was precisely the kind of attitude that frustrated his teammates. Even more harmful was the belief that George valued his media presence more than achieving victories. His show, Podcast P, became emblematic of his skewed priorities. This was a player earning more than $50 million annually, falling short on a faltering team, and dedicating his efforts to content creation instead of honing his basketball skills. Detractors highlighted that he seemed to be podcasting during the NBA's most disheartening team season, instead of doing everything in his power to aid his team's success. The recent leak during a meeting in Philadelphia serves as yet another illustration of this ongoing trend. Regardless of whether George was the one responsible for the leak, the swift suspicion from his teammates and fans reflected deeply on his standing in the league. In situations where trust frays within a team, it's typically the individual known for past controversies who is held accountable. However, George's conflicts with other NBA players merely scratched the surface of a broader narrative that has led him to become one of the least favored personalities in professional basketball. This long-standing pattern clarifies it all. Paul George's disputes with fellow NBA players represent merely the surface of a much larger issue. To grasp the reasons behind Joel Embiid and many others' disdain for George, one must examine the full trajectory of his career. This 15-year path has been characterized by missed opportunities, unmet expectations, and a recurring tendency to flee from challenges during tough times. The sad twist in Paul George's saga is that he began as a player the basketball community rallied behind. An overlooked talent, he had to compete at Fresno State before being selected in the lottery. He worked tirelessly to achieve his status, initially serving as a bench player for Indiana when he first joined the league. In his formative years, George epitomized what fans cherished about basketball, showcasing a spirit that triumphed over hardship. Following Danny Granger's decline, George embraced the spotlight, flourishing with some of the most iconic Pacers squads of that time. Despite enduring a devastating leg injury during a USA basketball practice, George made a triumphant return to Indiana's roster. He was destined to be a beacon of success, a player who rose above challenges to achieve true stardom. Yet at some point, Paul George veered off course. The athlete who had originally achieved success through diligence transformed into a person who anticipated that everything would just be provided for him. The pivotal moment occurred amid those playoff series in Indiana, when George made a choice that would haunt him throughout his career. In the 2017 playoffs against the Cleveland Cavaliers, George openly criticized his teammate C.J. Miles for attempting and failing at a crucial game-winning shot. Rather than uplifting his teammate or addressing the matter privately, George publicly blamed Miles in front of reporters. This was a startling example of ineffective leadership that would influence all subsequent events. The basketball deities often serve up a slice of poetic irony, and they did so with crushing impact. When George found himself poised to be the savior with the series hanging in the balance, he faltered, scoring just 15 points on a mere 23% shooting and failing to convert his game-winning attempt. From that instant, it felt as if Paul George was destined to face humiliation in every playoff encounter. The trend became dishearteningly routine. George would boast to the press, make grand forecasts about his contributions, only to disintegrate under the glare of the spotlight. Upon his transfer to Oklahoma City, he boldly addressed the press regarding his encounter with rookie Donovan Mitchell, nearly disregarding the emerging Jazz sensation prior to their playoff showdown. In retaliation, Mitchell averaged 28 points per contest as a rookie, leading to George's Thunder being ousted in 6 games. Once more, George's words backfired, leaving him embarrassed by his on-court efforts. The year in Oklahoma City was meant to signal George's comeback. In 2019, he delivered an impressive 28 points per game with exceptional shooting accuracy and led the league with 2.2 steals per night. He secured third place in both the MVP and Defensive Player of the Year races, showcasing an elite performance that validated the immense buzz about him. However, as the playoffs began, misfortune struck once more. Damian Lillard terminated George's season with his jaw-dropping 37-foot buzzer beater. Yet instead of praising what was an iconic shot, George had the nerve to label it poor shot selection. This kind of bitter backlash resulted in fans and fellow players losing their admiration for him. The trade to the Los Angeles Clippers was meant to be George's perfect narrative of returning home. The trade deal was enormous. 4 unprotected first-round picks, a lottery-protected first-round pick, 2 swap options, Danilo Gallinari, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. The Clippers had effectively bet their entire future to welcome George back home alongside Kawhi Leonard. The anticipation was sky-high. They were quickly labeled as championship frontrunners, with billboards populating Los Angeles proclaiming them the new rulers of Southern California. At last, Paul George found himself in the ideal scenario, representing his hometown team, teamed up with another elite player, surrounded by a roster tailored to leverage their strengths. What unfolded next became one of the most astonishing downfalls in NBA playoff lore. Holding a commanding 3-1 advantage over the Denver Nuggets, the Clippers sensationally succumbed to 4 consecutive losses. In the pivotal Game 7, George managed only 10 points, shooting a dismal 4 for 16, with a shocking 2 for 11 from beyond the arc. His dismal display led fans to coin the term Pandemic P, a twist on his playoff P moniker, highlighting his disastrous performance in critical moments. This was a player who had jeopardized it all for his team, their future, championship aspirations, and reputation, delivering one of the most infamous Game 7 showings in playoff history in return. Despite the embarrassment he faced, George's troubles persisted. He frequently missed games because of injuries, yet insisted on a supermax deal with a no-trade stipulation. Fans were shelling out top dollar to watch him, while he remained on the sidelines, all the while requesting additional funds and greater authority over his circumstances. The gap between George's view of himself and the actual situation had reached a ludicrous level. Here was a 34-year-old vet seeking a supermax and a no-trade clause, having proven to be one of the worst acquisitions in Clippers history. The nerve was astonishing. He had, on his own, shattered their title aspirations and was pleading for an even heftier paycheck to continue. When the Clippers astutely turned down his requests, George made his way to Philadelphia, where the saga unfolded anew. He quickly began expressing his desire to finish his career as a 76er and revert to his domineering demeanor, the same hollow commitments he had given to each prior franchise. The Philadelphia experiment swiftly turned into a fiasco as the team stumbled to a 2-12 record, with George posting the worst stats of his career. Rather than dedicating himself to the game and aiding his faltering teammates, George chose to invest his energy in producing podcast material, openly sharing the team's woes on his podcast. Following a disappointing performance where he scored only 2 points and faced an injury, George's immediate response was to whip up sensational content centered on his team's misfortunes. The perception was grim. Here was a player earning $50 million annually, underachieving on a struggling squad, and leveraging their setbacks to amplify his personal brand. The audience's response was immediate and harsh. A flood of remarks labeled him a full-time podcaster, doubting his genuine passion for basketball. The backlash extended beyond his on-court abilities. It delved into his priorities and his seemingly diminished dedication to victory. Overall, the sentiment among fans on social media was largely unfavorable. Following the rankings, George ranked prominently on the most disliked list due to his perceived lack of performance, his injuries, and his focus on podcasting over playing. The animosity transcended basketball itself. It centered on the belief that George was profiting at the expense of teams without offering sufficient value. Detractors frequently labeled him a third wheel, possessing the most All-NBA third-team selections, yet lacking the prowess to claim titles. This sentiment encapsulated the exasperation shared by both fans and peers regarding George's contributions. He consistently garnered acclaim and signed lucrative deals, yet fell short in crucial moments. The podcast incident epitomized all that is flawed in contemporary NBA culture. This was a player meant to concentrate on securing victories for his team, but he instead devoted time and resources to media pursuits while his squad was floundering. It highlighted a basic misalignment of priorities that infuriated fans and fellow players alike. What Joel had come to realize about NBA, and the source of his rising irritation with George, was that this cycle was destined to remain the same. George would not magically morph into a dependable ally or a game-winning player. He would continue to stir up trouble and focus on his own image rather than the success of the team. This was his true nature, and at 34, he was unlikely to change. The meeting in Miami wasn't merely centered around a single moment of betrayal. Paul George found himself facing the consequences of a long-standing history marked by shattered trust, unmet commitments, and self-serving actions. Regardless of whether he was the actual source of the leak, his teammates had their doubts. His career trajectory indicated he could indeed act disloyally. Joel Embiid's disclosure wasn't groundbreaking. It was merely the recognition of a truth well known across the NBA. Paul George had morphed into a detrimental influence, fracturing team dynamics, faltering under pressure, and routinely prioritizing his personal ambitions over the team's success. The sole astonishment was how long it took for someone to finally voice it publicly. If you found this video engaging and wish to delve into more thrilling content like it, feel free to click on any of the cards displayed on your screen.